Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful to join with you once again. And so, as always, let us all center into this moment now, remembering that now is the only time that is. Let go of all thoughts of the past, all future predictions. Just center into the now and breathe. So. We are here. And you are as well. Remember, this is the time of awakening. This is a time to wake up to your true self, which is you as a mind rather than you as a body. The body is a dream. It is not real. That is not who you are. But you are the dreamer of the dream. You are the mind behind the dream. So, with awakening, you are going from a mindless state, where you didn't even realize that you had a mind, to mindfulness, where you do realize there is a mind, and you are that mind that dreams. And so all along the way, you have choices, but the only choices that you really have, the real choices that you have, are between two thought systems. So when you fell asleep into the dream, you believed that you had separated from your creator, that you could possibly separate from love, which is that which created you, you see. And since you thought that you could separate from love, from God, you felt as though you had killed God, that you had destroyed God, and so you had to make another God, so to speak, to replace God. And this engendered a lot of guilt within you because you felt as though you had done something so wrong, so heinous, that there was no way that you could make it back. In fact, to the point that you didn't know that there was a getting back at all, you see. And you began to believe the stories you began to tell yourself, which was reinforced by those around you, of course. But these are all just stories. Stories all made up and not really real. Who you really are is completely untouched and unaffected by the stories in the dream. So, as you're going along, beginning to awaken, you realize that you can change your mind, because that is what we have been teaching. And so you are now practicing this. That's, as we said before, going from mindless to mindful, from unaware to aware. And opening yourself to the truth of who you really are, which is love. There is forgiveness, and forgiveness alone, really. But the ego will have you thinking otherwise. So, as we said before, there are two systems of thought. There is the system of thought that comes from your right mind, which is where the Holy Spirit abides. And then the system of thought, which comes from your ego mind, which is the wrong mind, you see. And so you're always going between the two. Are you going forward in your life, operating from your right mind, where the Holy Spirit is, or are you going along without awareness with the ego mind, which is the mind that you are so accustomed to the point that you believe that that actually is your mind. Does this make sense? You believe its stories. You believe its lies. And in fact, all that it has for you is lies. You see, you are infinite. It tells you that you are limited. You are unlimited. You are eternal, you see. So as you go along, you can always tell which mind you are operating from by how you feel. And that's something to become more and more aware of. And also to realize, and we want you to remember this, that everything you experience is by your choice, by your choosing, although you are not always aware of this. And so we have been giving some practices where you notice some scenarios that bring out a certain emotion in you or a certain reaction from you. And instead of just going blindly into whichever scenario it is, you say to yourself, here's that scenario. This is my typical reaction. What then is the appropriate way to engage in this scenario? So that's opening the way for the Holy Spirit to guide you. Does this make sense? So instead of going blindly in and just the typical habitual practice of reaction, you say, this is how I typically respond or react. And so I'm going to intentionally be more mindful in this situation. And I'm going to ask the Holy Spirit to be the one directing me. And so you open your mind to be guided by the Holy Spirit rather than the habits of your mind. So, and as you practice working with the Holy Spirit, then that becomes your go-to. Does this make sense? But this has to be practiced over and over and over again. As you know, in order to set up a new pattern in your mind, it has to be practiced over and over and reinforced over and over. So here's another thing. With awakening and realizing or learning that your true nature is of love because you were created by love, as love, one with love, and in truth you are one in the mind of God, you want to show up as love because that is what you are. And we have said this in the Course in Miracles. Teach only love, for that is what you are. So you can look at your life, and let's take you back to the scenarios we're speaking of. Let's say it's something that brings up feelings of agitation, any feelings less than peace are of the ego. Okay? And those are the thoughts you want to look at it, the feelings you really want to look at it and say, okay, Holy Spirit, how do you see this? I'm willing to give up my interpretation of this because it is true that I really do want to experience the peace of God. And in order to really experience the peace of God, you have to give up your own interpretation. You have to give up your own idea of what that is, you see, and let it come to your mind. And it is a remembrance of what the peace of God truly is. So that is forgiveness rather than blame, love rather than hate, or love rather than fear, light rather than dark, and all of that. So, and you let the Holy Spirit guide you all along the way. And life begins to lighten up for you. When you rely on the ego, there is a lot of buildup of negative emotion and guilt. And guilt is the thing we teach that you are suffering from. Does this make sense? So, to let that go is to look to the Holy Spirit, rather than believing that you, as a child of God, can possibly be guilty of anything in truth. That doesn't mean, of course, on the form level, that there may be instances where there are better things you could have done. Does this make sense? But you learn from those experiences, you see. You learn from those experiences and you choose again. You choose to listen to the Holy Spirit, which means to step back, be patient, and allow the thoughts of God to come to you rather than inserting your own. So, you were created whole, and whole you do remain, yet your experience does not always seem to be so. And what we want for you to have is that experience of wholeness, and that is choosing wholeness, you see. So you can't look at wholeness and feel whole if you are listening to the mind of limitation, which is the ego mind. You really want to move into yourself as a whole mind that you truly are. That's the mind that is one with God. So, love. Some things that we want for you to begin to practice is really becoming more vigilant in your awareness of what mind you are thinking with and where your mind is taking you. Remember that the world is but a product of your own mind, meaning a reflection of guilt projected out. It is the ego's game, that takes everything that is within and projects it out so that you remain unaware that you haven't even have a mind, you see. And it scatters everything about so that you think that you're scattered. You think that you are incomplete. And so you go searching outside yourself to complete yourself, when in truth, everything that you need is within, you see. So just go about with a greater awareness in your life. Your life is your classroom. Choose the Holy Spirit as your teacher, and you will be guided in a way to lead you home, where you have never truly left. And that will never change, you see. So, So at any rate, during this time, this dream, we are aware of a lot of things that you are aware of as well, going on in the world that you perceive. And it feels as though things are happening to you, that you could possibly be a victim of things outside yourself. We want you to wake up to the truth that the only thing you are ever a victim of is your own thought. You see, there is no one and nothing that can think for you. There is no one and nothing that can rip your mind away from you, you see. But it is your decision or your lack of awareness to think that anyone can. Does this make sense? And what you want to do is at this time reclaim yourself as you are, as the thinker, the thoughts, as the mind that is dreaming, the dreamer of the dream, rather than yourself as a victim figure just going along without a mind. So, of course, we can go on and on about all of this, and we do look forward to going on and on about all of this. But here we are, and we are aware of things and questions that have been presented, and we are ready for them now, ready to have conversations with you. Now,
hello, Jesus. In Workbook Lesson 76, you taught that to believe pushing fluid into our veins through a sharpened needle would protect us from disease was, quote, insanity, in your words. This is obviously talking about vaccination. Also, in that same lesson, you teach that immunization is another, quote, foolish magical belief, unquote. Again, your words. An intense vaccination discussion is going on in the world right now. I personally have been shamed and pressured about my guided vaccination decisions. Would you dialogue further on this, please? Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, in the beginning there of your question having to do with pushing a syringe into your arm, or someone else doing that, to insert a liquid into your physical apparatus. The reason why we say it this way, it's true, yes, indeed, it is insanity, it's absolute insanity, but the world is insanity, okay? So lighten up about it. And also, we say it this way because we are being lighter about it. Does this make sense? Meaning, you can look on this and smile, knowing that you are the dreamer of the dream, and it is but a dream, you see.
Yes.
And not taking it personally, and not setting out on a new mission to accomplish anything with the illusory. Does this make sense?
Yes.
So our message about what you were talking about is we can't tell you what to do with any of this because it is all unreal. And we wouldn't tell you what to do with it because it's not real, you see. And our aim is to help you awaken from the dream and not get more comfortable in it. So the only thing we have to say about any of this, and this goes for any kind of magic, which is all of everything here, really. And we mean everything. We'll get more into that after this. that be light about it and don't take it seriously. And whatever brings you the greatest amount of inner peace, go forward with that. Does this make sense?
Yes.
So you're not going into any of this with a mind of fear, but instead going into any of this with a mind of peace. And the mind of peace looks on all of this with a light heart and just smiles because you know the truth. You do know the truth. So you don't take it seriously. And you know the body is not you. The body is not real. Therefore, whatever even happens to the body is completely meaningless. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Wonderful. And so, as we were saying, all of this magic, it is not just medication that's magic. And this is the kind of thing, there needs to be a releasing of feelings of guilt about the whole idea of the magic and all of that. Just don't take it seriously. Be light about it. Another thing that's magic would be oxygen. Oxygen is magic. Food is magic. Liquid is magic. It's all magic. Does this make sense? And in no way would we say, stop breathing. You see?
Yes.
Because breathing, that's a magical act. Because you're not a body. And what you're doing is trying to keep something that isn't even real or you living, or what is perceived as living. And so, of course, like we said, we would never encourage people to stop breathing. That would be absolutely absurd. That would make no sense. Remember, your purpose here is forgiveness, you see. That is your function, you see. So. Anything else?
No. Someone else has a comment.
Wonderful.
It says, for things like vaccinations that some in the world want, I always think of the other words spoken, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, in my mind. That means you can do for the world what is wanted without allowing it to affect me or us.
Right. You just don't take it seriously. So if it feels peaceful and feels like the obvious logical thing to do, do it. If you feel that it's not necessary and it's not a big deal to you at all, it's just whatever, and that's more peaceful, then do the other, you see. Does this make sense?
Yes.
It really is about not taking any of this seriously, because the more you take it seriously, the more you reinforce it as reality or as something that's true, you see, when nothing here is true. Nothing here at all is true.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have another comment online.
Yes.
Related to fully awakening and enlightenment. Is it the same? Is it something we will arrive in this realm in the dream before we go back to heaven? Is this a combination of our, quote, effort to be vigilant on what mind we are thinking from and grace? And about invitation. How do we truly invite the Holy Spirit to help us? How do we really open up to receive?
Let's go back a minute.
Okay.
There was an initial conversation here. What was that initial conversation?
Fully awakening and enlightenment.
Yes, and the question is, are they the same?
Is it the same?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And is it something we will arrive in this realm in the dream before we go back to heaven?
It can happen. It can happen. We are not going to say that it is going to happen or not. It's up to you. You are the mind that opens itself to that, you see. So, and the thing is, with enlightenment and with awakening takes a light heart about it, you see. And yes, we use words such as vigilance and dedication and commitment and all of that. And a lot of the times these words can feel very heavy and very, very serious. We know that. But what we mean is just be strong about it, you see. And part of that strength about it is to not take it seriously. Because when you begin to take it seriously, when you begin to get really rigid about these things and very ritualistic about these things, then you know the ego is involved. Does this make sense? Because the ego will come in and go along with you as it can influence, or you can allow it to influence you to really become rigid.
Yes.
And the rigidity is not of enlightenment, you see. An enlightened being is enlightened. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Not enheavied.
So, it makes sense.
Yes. Or endarkened. So if you feel that seriousness, that rigid feeling, just laugh it off and say, okay, I see what's going on here. I see the ego is involved. I'm just going to shake it off and do something else instead. You see? And sometimes when you shake it off and do something else instead, that's when you hear the Holy Spirit. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Because when the ego becomes involved in it, then the barriers come up. And that seriousness is like a wall that says, none shall pass. Does this make sense?
Yes, it does.
Wonderful. So you really want to go with the flow and follow along with the Holy Spirit, who is always the leader of light, you see.
Excellent.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The next submitted question. I have a situation that erupted 10 years ago. I woke one morning in extreme terror like I had never experienced before. It arose as an intense burning in the center of my chest that went out across both arms. The image of the crucifixion comes to mind. The thoughts that went through my mind on that first morning, simultaneously with the terror, was that I had done something terribly wrong and I needed to go back home. Is this the terror the Course refers to when we realize we are separate from God? Any insight is greatly appreciated.
Wonderful. So, being a Course student, you are aware that the ego uses the body, and its use for the body is always to instill fear and become a distraction. Does this make sense?
Waiting? Yes, it does.
Wonderful. And so, go back to the part right before the last part.
The thoughts that went through my mind on that first morning,
Go ahead.
simultaneously with the terror, was that I had done something terribly wrong and I
Yes.
needed to go back home.
And this is wonderful to talk about because that terror is the ego saying, I destroyed God. You must be punished. Does this make sense? And the other interesting thing is that you immediately thought of the crucifixion.
Yes.
And you can see how that kind of ties together in that that was, at the moment, the purpose of that, you see. Because the ego says, if I crucify you here and now, then God won't have to. Does this make sense? And so,
Yes.
and that feeling of I have to go home is you realize that you really want to be home. You really want to have the experience of home, that You want to have that experience that you are one still with God. And that is true. And that's what the awakening is for, is to wake up that, oh, I didn't actually separate from God. I can't separate from God in truth. That is just a thought. That's that tiny mad idea, the ego. Does this make sense? So.
Yes. There's more.
Yes.
Over these 10 years came moments of beautiful peace and profound insights. Some of these experiences lasted a few minutes, some for a week to 2.5 months of bliss, only to have the intensity in the body return. It affects my mental, emotional, and physical bodies. When this occurred initially, I prayed and asked God, how could I possibly be of service to him in this state? I didn't receive a direct answer, but at some point I heard these words, quote, burning off the dross.
So.
And over the years, I've been to doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, a sound healer, massage therapist. The diagnosis has been PTSD/childhood development trauma. I have a hard time accepting this, quote, trauma diagnosis, even though I have been seeing a therapist who works with development trauma. Something in me isn't believing this is the issue. I'm a student of the course, and I would be most grateful for your guidance and gratitude.
And that would be why you're not believing the issue that they have presented you with, because you know the truth. You know that it's really not about a childhood trauma, but it is about the false idea of separation, you see. Does this make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
And so the only trauma that is truly experienced is that of the false thought. That thought that you could be separate from God, that you could possibly be left bereft. And that is what the ego wants you to believe. It doesn't want you to know that there is any such thing as oneness, to the point that it doesn't even know what oneness is at all, you see. Its idea of oneness is separation. So really, we also were going to say that the reason that doesn't feel accurate to you is because you do know the truth to some degree. Does this make sense? And so you also know that any therapist really can't quite help you with this kind of situation. Does this make sense?
Yes.
And so what you want to do is go to your inner teacher, the Holy Spirit, and ask for guidance in this, you see. Holy Spirit, how do you see this? Holy Spirit, what would you have me do? Where would you have me go? And so on. What steps can I take? What steps can I take? You see, does this make sense?
Waiting.
And what the Holy Spirit does is helps you release yourself from the false idea of separation, rather than reinforce the false idea of separation with thoughts that do come from trauma or about trauma. Does this make sense?
Yes, and I've been doing that, yet I don't seem to get any enduring relief.
So lighten up. That's what we're going to say. Meaning, don't take it so seriously, okay? Be kind to yourself. Be gentle on yourself. Don't try so hard to hear the guidance, you see. But instead, lighten up on yourself about it and just say, okay, this is a product of the ego thought system. It will lighten up as I lighten up. It will lighten up as I choose to lighten up. And I'll just keep going with my daily affairs with a light heart, rather than a seriousness, because what I do know is that this really is a dream, and that who I really am is completely unaffected and untouched by anything that seems to occur here. You see. So the answer for this really is about lightening up on yourself. And if you do have those experiences of extreme panic and all of that, again, try to do this. Try to detach from the feeling and just say, this is that pattern of thought. This is that false pattern of thought from the false thought, the ego. And so instead of going along with it, you're able to step back and observe it as an idea that, yes, you feel physically, you feel it very physically. But even that, you can say, this is part of the dream. This is not real. Does this make sense? And once you see it this way, then you have put distance between yourself and it. Do you see what we mean?
Yes.
So we are going to suggest that you try that out, but be easy on yourself about it, you see? And we're saying, so the next time you do have one of these episodes, try to remember this, you see? And even in the middle of it, let's say you go through a whole period of the panic, and then suddenly you remember that. Don't feel guilty that you didn't remember it right away, but in that moment, right then and there, your realization that, okay, this is that pattern again, the distance has been put in between yourself and it. Does this make sense?
Yes, so the burning is going on right now as I listen to you.
Because that, we are going to say, has to do with the ego thought system. We are telling you this right now because we want you to be able to try this right here, okay? That burning sensation, that is not true. Does this make sense? It is not real. Be kind to yourself. That's actually what we want to say. Can you look upon yourself right now with the burning sensation and feel love on yourself? Do you follow what we're saying?
Yes.
So instead of judging, okay, that's another thing, is that feeling of panic does come from judgment. And so the burning sensation is also from judgment. And you can look on it and not judge the judgment, you see.
I understand.
Wonderful. Yes, this is simple, but not always easy. And so these kinds of experiences are where you can really put into practice the teachings that we give and see how you can choose to use it as an opportunity to be more kind to yourself, you see. To be lighter on yourself. And to look on this experience as, there it is again. I'm just going to be kind, and it is what it is. And there's nothing I can do about that but to step back and just say, okay, it just is the way it is right now. You see, does this make sense?
Yes.
How are you feeling?
A little calmer in the body.
Wonderful. Then you have achieved a point of peace. And that's your goal, you see. That ability to feel peace in the midst of this kind of experience, or any kind of experience that would seem to draw other feelings instead, is where you are headed, you see. So that you can be in any situation and still be in a mind of peace. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Why would something like this occur out of nowhere?
Well, first of all, it seems to be out of nowhere, but it really is not out of nowhere. The only way that it's out of nowhere is because it is coming again from the ego thought system, which is nowhere. Does this make sense? It is nowhere and it is nothing in truth, although you experience it as something and somewhere. But it is just that. It's really not coming out of nowhere. And this is something we'd like to talk about a little bit, that nothing you experience is coming out of left field. Nothing you experience is actually coming from outside of you and coming at you. Always there are decisions being made in the mind constantly that you are not always aware of. That is a thought that you have chosen to have the experience about. Does this make sense? And this is why we teach to become more mindful, so that in the very beginning of the day, tune into yourself. Something that's good to do is wake up and say, I am in class, and choose the teacher you would like to listen to, which we are encouraging you. In fact, we're just going to tell you to choose the Holy Spirit. Choose the Holy Spirit as your teacher, and let the Holy Spirit guide your way. And then remain mindful of the guidance that comes from the Holy Spirit. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Then you become more aware of yourself as a mind, and you become more aware of your mind working in the illusion, you see. And like we said in the beginning about becoming more mindful of which scenarios bring what reactions out and all of that, so that no matter what it is you enter into, you have an awareness about you that says, okay, this scenario seems to draw up this kind of feeling, you see, because I made a decision to have this kind of feeling about this scenario. Does this make sense?
Yes, one more point.
Sure.
This intensity often wakes me out of sleep. Is this the same thing?
It is the same thing
going on?
Yes, and in fact, we'll give you a little example here. The channel said yes, that for a while there, she was having this experience as well, where she would be sound asleep, but in the middle of the night, wake up in sheer terror for no apparent reason. So much so that she couldn't function, you see. And she didn't know what to do. So what she would be doing is get out of bed and pace back and forth until she was able to settle down as much as she could. But then she says that the terror would remain, and so there was never an ability to fall into a deep sleep at that point. And so what we told her was that it's just the ego mind realizing that you are becoming more aware that you are a mind. Does this make sense? And so, of course, to keep you as it wants you to be asleep with it, it sends you these feelings, you see. And it's funny that we say it sends you these feelings, because it's really not sending you these feelings. It's still in your mind, you see.
Yes.
So it's not like an entity that's outside of you that's coming in and sending you feelings, but it's a thought in your mind that still is there in your mind. So that's why we were saying to lighten up about it and really just look at it and say, okay, it's a pattern. It's a pattern of thought that is coming up. And just, you can feel how much lighter it is to say it's a pattern of thought. Does this make sense?
Yes, it does.
So instead of even saying it's the ego, because even that kind of feels like, okay, it's a separate being thing that's roaming around. But no, it's a pattern of thought. There's that pattern of thought. And you can even think of it the way that so many have documented in the illusion, the visual of the neural pathways, you see. And so you could even see it as a pattern of thought. If you were observing a brain, you could see it firing off. Does this make sense?
Yes.
And so just see it like that. And then the answer to it is love. The answer to it is to just step back and just be at peace and love. That's the answer always. It says, be more kind, be more gentle, be more forgiving, be even lighter on yourself.
Yes.
Wonderful. Do you feel complete?
Thank you so very much. Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
On a related note, there was how do we truly invite the Holy Spirit to help us? How do we really open up to receive? Sometimes we do ask, but it seems that we need to arrive to a certain place of surrender to finally open up to receive the Holy Spirit's help.
Doesn't that feel like a new wall? Can you feel that? That feeling as though you need to arrive at a certain place of surrender in order to hear from the Holy Spirit. Doesn't that feel like a kind of like a barricade? Do you see what we're saying? So the invitation to the Holy Spirit is to open your mind to being light, to being open, which is to be forgiving and to not take things seriously, you see. Does this make sense? Because sometimes the thought of I've got to let the Holy Spirit's voice come in, and there's also an idea of how the Holy Spirit's voice is going to come in. So let's say for this channel, it comes in this way and comes in words, but sometimes it's just an intuitive feeling, you see.
Yeah.
Does this make sense?
Yeah, so the answer is to lighten up about it?
Yes, indeed. That's the invitation to the Holy Spirit, to lighten up. Because you're not here to get to the point where you have it as almost like a trophy. I have heard the Holy Spirit. Does this make sense?
Yes, okay, yeah.
So that's why we say lighten up, because really, truly, the invitation to the Holy Spirit is to lighten up, is to be easier on yourself.
Great.
Wonderful. Yes, gentleness is key. If you want to hear the Holy Spirit, be gentle. If you want to hear the Holy Spirit, be kind. You see.
So gentleness, kindness, and love.
Yes, indeed. All makes for peace.
Sounds great.
Wonderful.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, next question.
Yes.
How can our guardian angels help us? For example, my daughter is upset that her children, 1 and 4 years old, wake up at 4 a.m. every day. She is exhausted and frustrated and having difficulty to look at the situation with love. I told her not to have any resistance and not to focus on her reality, as then it will continue. Can the guardian angels or Holy Spirit help in this situation? How can she have a peaceful life with her children? Or is this part of her learning?
Oh, we'll just say this is part of her learning right now, meaning that she can learn to, again, and you're going to like it, lighten up. We know that it doesn't feel like something you can feel light about if your children are waking up at certain times and all of that. But the feeling of the need for things to be different is actually what's keeping it active. Does this make sense? If you could make peace with the situation, it's going to pass. They're not always going to be like this, and eventually they'll be out of the house anyway, you see.
Yes.
So So just be easier on yourself and the situation, and then it will lighten up. And the frustration comes because of the need for things to be different than they are, you see. And also the feeling as though this is like eternity or something like that, when it's not, you see. And another thing about the false thought, the ego, is that it loves this kind of thing because this is where you can feel frustrated. Does this make sense? So, of course, its idea of good time is frustration. Is being absolutely frustrated to the point that you can't hear the Holy Spirit and that you just remain in that, you see.
So it's testing me.
Well, it's not that we wouldn't want to say that it's testing you. It's that we want to say you can choose better. Does this make sense? So instead of seeing it as something testing you, see it as an opportunity.
So ego is testing?
Of course, ego is always testing and doing all this stuff. But the other part of this is the ego isn't even doing anything at all. It just is this nothingness. Does this make sense?
Yes.
It's a thought.
So it's just an experience to learn from.
It's just a thought.
It's just a thought.
It's seriously just a thought. It's seriously just a pattern of thinking, you see.
Okay.
One that you and everyone, we're going to say, has their own version that you're addicted to, you see.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So rather than taking it so seriously, don't take it seriously at all. Just lighten up.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So in a follow-up, is it true that everything is planned out by God? I know you said we decide everything before we come into form, and that we choose to come into form to finish some unfinished business. Is that right?
Well, we're going to clean this up a little bit for you. God didn't plan any of this. Remember, God is love. Does this make sense? And being love,
yes.
It knows only love, and therefore has no idea that any of this is anything other than love is going on. Does this make sense?
Yes.
But yes, it was your decision to come into the dream and fall asleep, you see.
So we forget everything when we arrive. What if we don't resolve what we came for?
So then you resolve it elsewhere.
Is that the cycle of reincarnation? Until we reawaken?
No, not at all.
Okay.
You can reincarnate, so to speak, but actually you can't literally reincarnate because reincarnation would be a literal physical body coming back. Does this make sense? Whereas, yes, you can incarnate. You can continuously come back here and come into a body and have the experience, you see. But this is not, well, until you learn. And we want you to realize that learning is ongoing. It doesn't stop here, okay? Because you're a mind. The mind continues to learn. Does this make sense?
Yes.
The mind is unlimited and eternal and does not operate in time. So it's an ongoing thing. But the thing is, you as a mind, who you really are, is love. And so the eternity that it is love, you see. And so its ongoing activity is love, you see. Does this make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. That's very important to realize that your real mind, which is your right mind, which is the mind you share with God, is love, and it is constantly creating. But its creations are only love, you see. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You are welcome.
One last question.
Yes.
My question is about tarot and other divination tools such as dowsing. Are they useful tools to help communicate with the Holy Spirit / superconsciousness in order to receive the information requested and to aid clarification to a situation/question. Also, I've experienced looking into my own eyes in the mirror and seeing the reflection of other images reflect back to me. Are they past lives of the self?
Let's stop there for a moment. Let's start with the first question, which had to do with dowsing and tarot. So, we want you to know that all of those tools are form related. They're all of form. Does this make sense? Meaning you don't need a divination tool in order to communicate with the Holy Spirit. Does this make sense? You don't need any tools to communicate with the Holy Spirit. All you need is what we just told you a little while ago. To open to the Holy Spirit is to be light, you see, to lighten up, you see. Does this make sense? Sometimes these tools can help you to realize there's more than what you see with your physical eyes. Does this make sense? It can open your mind to a greater experience. But the thing is, as you are waking up, you don't rely on these tools. So maybe for a little bit of time, someone who's waking up might first begin with that, not because they were guided in this kind of situation to use them, but instead came upon them through experience, just drawn to it. And that would be the Holy Spirit guiding someone to look at things that will help open them to a greater experience. Does this make sense? But then that is so that you can go beyond the tools. Does this make sense?
Waiting.
Everything the Holy Spirit teaches is for you to go beyond this plane of existence.
Okay.
And not rely on anything of form. But that's all things that happen in the end. We don't mean to suddenly stop relying on things of form if you need something of form, that you believe you're a form. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay, because we're not saying to abandon all form. Okay? All we're saying is that what you give to the Holy Spirit for the Holy Spirit to use, the symbols you give to the Holy Spirit will take you beyond the symbols. Does this make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So there's another part of this.
Yes.
I have experienced looking into my own eyes in the mirror and seeing the reflection of other images reflected back to me. Are they past lives of the self? I would love to meet my guides and ET family through this practice. Could you comment on this?
The only thing that we can tell you about this is follow your own intuition and follow what comes from within. Does this make sense?
Yes.
We can't tell you if what you're seeing are past lives or not. Only you can know that, and you know it by feeling from within. We're not talking about within your body, but you would have a knowing. Does this make sense?
So the purpose, I guess, is to understand we live many lives and no information is lost, and to see we're not alone.
You could see it that way.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. That's wonderful. So we're
out of time.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes the hand signals will get lost. It's like, is he giving us a peace sign? Or is that 2 minutes left?
No, it's 2:00.
It's 2:00. Okay, so that's even more. 2:00. So thank you everyone for this beautiful joining. We have enjoyed this interaction beyond words. We are always with you. We love you eternally. You are love itself. Remember that you are not alone and that you are eternal. You are love and you are loved and blessed always. And thank you again. Namaste.